Elena studied her reflection in the polished obsidian walls of the Aldari reception hall, adjusting her formal diplomatic uniform. Behind her practiced smile, her mind raced, cataloging the inconsistencies that had been piling up over the past 72 hours. "Admiral Salas, you appear troubled," came a melodic voice. Turning, Elena found herself face to face with Anxelara, the Vestry cultural attaché whose silver-scaled skin caught the ambient light in hypnotic patterns. "Just diplomatic nerves," Elena lied smoothly. "Earth's agricultural expansion proposal is important to my people." Anxelara's 4 eyes blinked in their distinct pattern, top pair first, then bottom, that Elena had learned indicated amusement. "You humans, always so concerned with growth and expansion. Such charming ambition." There it was again. That subtle condescension masked as compliment. Like humans were precocious children to be humored rather than equals to be respected. Elena's communicator chirped, displaying Mira's encrypted signal. "If you'll excuse me, duty calls." She navigated through the crowded reception, nodding to various dignitaries while keeping her pace casual. The Aldari Central Archives were technically open to all Confederate species, yet somehow the most valuable sections always seemed to be temporarily restricted for conservation whenever human researchers requested access. Mira had gone in through a service entrance, using credentials Elena didn't want to know the origin of. "What did you find?" Elena asked when they met in a quiet alcove beneath a towering statue of the Aldari Great Unifier. Mira's dark eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Records. Historical data about the Tarkans." Elena felt her blood chill. The Tarkans, the species that supposedly destroyed themselves through civil war just before humans achieved FTL travel. Their cautionary tale was taught to every human child as a reason why the Confederate guidance was so valuable. "The Tarkans didn't self-destruct," Mira whispered, showing Elena images on her datavad. "They were systematically dismantled, their colonies isolated one by one, their military assets sabotaged, their government infiltrated, all because they developed a theoretical framework for dimension-folding technology that would have made the Confederate control of hyperspace lanes obsolete." Elena's eyes narrowed as she swiped through the classified reports. "And we're following the exact same technological development path." "Worse," Mira said. "I found our file. We're classified as Stage 3 containment with a subcategory I've never seen before. Exceptional potential threat." A shadow fell over them. Elena looked up to see Ambassador Kelter, his normally friendly Aldari features now unreadable. "Admiral Salas, Dr. Patel, how disappointing to find you here, of all places." His upper limbs shifted, revealing a ceremonial sash that hadn't been there during the reception. The Containment Council had such hopes for humanity's integration. Elena's hand moved to her sidearm, a ceremonial piece that contained very unceremonial modifications courtesy of Earth's covered R&D division. "How many others?" she demanded. "How many species before us?" Kelter's expression shifted to something almost like regret. "You would have been given a comfortable place, Elena. Your people would have been happy in their assigned role." "We make our own roles," Elena said, as Mira slowly reached for the emergency beacon hidden in her collar. "Then you leave us no choice but to accelerate the timetable." Kelter raised his communication band. "Enact Protocol Sentinel. The human containment begins now." Commander Y pressed his back against the bulkhead as the ship's emergency systems wailed. The Vigilant shuddered under another impact. "Damage report," he shouted over the chaos. Lieutenant Diaz's hands flew across her console. "Multiple breaches in sectors 4 through 7. The Confederate escort vessels are claiming it's an accidental weapons discharge during calibration." "Convenient," Way muttered, watching as the supposedly friendly Aldari cruisers repositioned themselves. "An accident that disabled our main engines and communications array." Through the view screen, he observed the damaged transport they'd rescued. The very reason they'd diverted from patrol. The distress call had seemed legitimate, but now... "Sir," called his security chief, The Krell survivor is conscious. Medbay says he's insisting on speaking with you. Says it's matter of galactic security. Wei found the injured Krell engineer propped up on a medical bed, the stubs of his ceremonially clipped wings twitching with agitation. His feathers, once vibrant blue according to xenobiology records, had faded to a dull gray, the mark of a servant caste. "Commander," Trill croaked, his avian eyes darting to check for listeners. "They know I've defected. That's why they're attacking." "Who knows? The Confederacy. The Triumvirate. The true power. My masters." Trill's voice faltered. "I served in High Chancellor Vexela's household. I was invisible to them, just another wing-clipped servant. But I heard things, saw things." The ship rocked with another impact. Alarms intensified. "We have minutes at most," Wei said grimly. "Tell me what you know." "Humanity is scheduled for containment. Your species developed too quickly, asked too many questions." Trill's claws clutched desperately at Wei's uniform. "They've been replacing your officials, sabotaging key systems. The Proxima colony is already compromised. It's being used as a staging area." Wei's blood ran cold. His sister and her family lived on Proxima. "The other attacks, the Novans, the Tarchans, I've seen the records. But humanity is different. They fear you more than the others." "Why?" "Because you care for other species. You would fight not just for yourselves." Trill pulled a crystalline data chip from beneath his feathers. "This contains the containment directive. Your Admiral Salas must see it. If I'm captured, they'll extract my memories, discover what I've stolen." The medical bay doors hissed open. Dr. Chen entered, her expression grave. "Commander, engineering reports the reactor containment field is failing. We have evacuation orders." Wei took the data chip, concealing it in his uniform's hidden pocket. "Can he be moved?" "I can move," Trill insisted, struggling to stand. "But not to escape pods. They'll target them first." Wei made a swift decision. "Dr. Chen, prepare the experimental scout vessel. Authorize activation under my command codes." Her eyes widened. "The prototype. It's barely tested. And invisible to Confederate sensors," Wei finished. "Perfect for our needs." Minutes later, as the Vigilant began breaking apart, a tiny vessel slipped away from the doomed ship's auxiliary bay. Its revolutionary stealth system, developed in secret by Earth engineers who'd always maintained a healthy paranoia about their alien allies, rendered it virtually undetectable. "They're not firing on us," Dr. Chen observed from the cramped cockpit. "They think we went down with the ship." Wei's jaw tightened as he watched his command vessel disintegrate under Confederate fire. 327 crew members sacrificed to maintain the illusion of peace. "Set course for Earth," he said, clutching the data chip that now felt like it burned against his chest. "And pray we're not too late." In the rear compartment, Trill huddled under a thermal blanket, his eyes haunted. "Commander, there's something else you should know. The reason they fear humans more than any species before." Wei turned. "What is it?" "Human children." Trill's voice was barely audible. "They've been studying them for decades. Unlike our young, yours question everything. They never stop asking why. The Triumvirate believes this trait alone makes your species ungovernable in the long term." Wei couldn't help but smile grimly. They might be right about that. Elena pressed her palm against the cold stone wall as the hidden elevator descended deeper into the asteroid. Beside her, Mira clutched the data crystal containing the damning evidence they'd barely escaped with. Their Aldari guide. Naren, a member of a resistance movement Elena hadn't known existed until 12 hours ago, stood silently at the controls. "How much farther?" Elena asked, checking the charge on the weapon she'd taken from Kelter after their confrontation. "Patience, Admiral," Naren replied. His skin, lacking the luminescent quality of other Aldari, marked him as part of their scientist caste, traditionally kept from political power. The sanctuary must remain hidden. We change access points weekly. The elevator slowed, opening into a vast cavern that stole Elena's breath. Carved within the asteroid was an entire settlement. Dwellings, hydroponics gardens, and research facilities integrated into the stone. But what struck her most were the inhabitants, species she recognized only from xenobiology archives, supposedly extinct or isolated on quarantined worlds. A being approached whose crystalline exoskeleton refracted light in rainbow patterns, a Novan, a species officially devastated by plague, a century ago. "I am Sorix," the crystalline being said, voice resonating with harmonic overtones. "Welcome to the last free enclave in Confederate space." "How?" Mira gestured at the Thragan community. "The historical records claim your kind died out." "We were meant to," Sorix replied, leading them toward a central chamber. "As were all who developed technologies the triumvirate couldn't control. Some of us were fortunate enough to be rescued by those who saw through the deception." The chamber they entered contained a holographic projection system far more advanced than anything Elena had seen in Confederate use. Representatives of a dozen species gathered around it, their faces showing the universal signs of tension that crossed biological boundaries. "Show them," Sorix commanded. The hologram flickered to life, displaying a three-dimensional map of Confederate space. Pulsing red indicators appeared throughout human territory. "These are staged Confederate assets already positioned near your colonies and outposts," explained a tall, willowy being with translucent skin. "A Helio, another supposedly extinct race. And these yellow markers appeared along travel routes. Air checkpoints being established to isolate your system when the containment order executes." Elena studied the tactical display with growing horror. They'd been planning this for decades. "Centuries," corrected Sorix. "Since before you achieved spaceflight. The triumvirate monitors all developing worlds. Those showing traits they deem problematic are marked for eventual containment." Mira inserted her stolen data crystal into the projector. New images appeared, classified Confederate research studying human behavior. "They've been running experiments on us," she whispered. "Cultural influence operations, controlled technology releases, even selecting which human leaders receive their longevity treatments." A smaller Novan approached, carrying a device Elena didn't recognize. "This scanner will detect if you have monitoring nanites. All Confederate gifts contain them." Elena submitted to the scan, watching in disgust as the device lit up around her diplomatic medallion and ceremonial rings, presents from her Aldari counterparts. "The worst part," said Narration, removing the compromise items, "is what they planned for your children." He activated another hologram showing Confederate educational modules designed for human schools, subtly altered to reinforce obedience and discourage innovation. "They seed these values over generations," explained Sorix. "Within 3 human lifespans, your species would willingly accept subservient status, believing it was your natural place." Elena's fists clenched. "Not my people." "That's why they fear you," said a voice from the shadows. A hunched figure emerged, a Quillari, one of the ancient founding species of the Confederacy. The room fell silent in shock. "I am Vex Morio," the Quillari said, "once High Counselor, now exile. I came to warn you, the containment of Earth isn't proceeding according to standard protocols." "Meaning?" Elena demanded. "They're not planning to subjugate humanity." Vex Morio's compound eyes fixed on her. "They're planning to eradicate it." Admiral Kazuo Yamamoto set down his granddaughter's birthday gift, a handcrafted model of his flagship, as his quantum-encrypted communicator vibrated with a priority alert. The children's laughter faded as he stepped onto the balcony of his Tokyo apartment, the setting sun casting long shadows across the city. "Authentication Prometheus Omega-7, he spoke quietly. Commander Wei's face appeared, haggard and constrained. "Admiral, the Vigilant is gone. We were ambushed under the guise of a rescue operation." Yamamoto's expression remained stoic, but his knuckles whitened around the communicator. "Survivors. 327 lost. I escaped with Dr. Chen and a Krell defector with critical intelligence. Wei's voice dropped lower. Sir, it's happening. Containment protocol has been activated. As Wei shared what they'd learned, Yamamoto gazed at the sunset, perhaps the last peaceful one Earth would know for generations. When the transmission ended, he activated a secondary communication system hidden within his family's ancient samurai armor display, a system completely disconnected from any technology of Confederate origin. Initiate Cassandra Protocol. Authentication. The stars hide older hunters. Across the solar system, dormant systems awakened. On Mars, beneath the Olympus Research Complex, General Sofia Rodriguez was conducting a routine inspection when her neural implant, purely human technology, pinged with the coded alert. Without hesitation, she diverted to a restricted elevator and descended to sublevel 12. General Rodriguez greeted the AI security system. Cassandra Protocol confirmed. Awaiting instructions. Begin Phase 1 evacuation. Priority personnel only. Maintain facade operations. Within minutes, key scientists, engineers, and their families were being quietly moved through a network of underground tunnels, while holographic projections maintained the illusion of normal activity in the complex above. Meanwhile, in the Europa Research Station, Dr. Imani Okafor received the alert while supervising a test of their latest propulsion system, one that operated on principles the Confederacy had never shared with humanity. Lock it down, she ordered her team. Erase all network data and transfer to isolated quantum storage. Her deputy, Dr. Takahashi, looked up in alarm. The Cassandra Protocol. It's not a drill. I'm afraid not. Okafor accessed a hidden terminal, initiating a facility-wide security protocol. Remember your training. We have 19 hours to disappear completely. As her team sprang into action, Okafor opened a sealed compartment containing technology that officially didn't exist, a prototype defense system capable of disrupting the Confederate backdoors embedded in Earth's infrastructure. Across Jupiter's orbit, within the seemingly abandoned mining stations of the Trojan asteroids, Admiral Yamamoto's most secret project stirred to life. Captain Sarah Chen, officially listed as retired 3 years earlier, stood on the bridge of the UES Typhoon, the first warship built entirely with human technology since first contact. All hands to battle stations, she commanded. Stealth systems active. Prepare for silent deployment. The Typhoon and her sister ships, a fleet hidden in plain sight, disengaged from their moorings, their revolutionary drive systems leaving no energy signature for Confederate sensors to detect. Back on Earth, Admiral Yamamoto watched his granddaughter play, blissfully unaware that her future hung in the balance. His communicator signaled again. Sir, his aide reported, the Confederate diplomatic fleet has increased speed. They'll arrive 12 hours ahead of schedule. Of course they will, Yamamoto murmured. Has Wei's ship reached Luna Base? Yes, sir. The Krell defector is being debriefed now. Yamamoto nodded. And Admiral Salas? Still no contact, sir. Turning back to the family gathering, Yamamoto caught his daughter's questioning gaze. She'd served in fleet intelligence before retiring to raise her family. She could read the situation in her father's bearing. Is it time? She asked softly, joining him at the balcony. Yes, he confirmed. Take Hana and the others to the mountain house. Use the old protocols. As she nodded and moved to gather the family, Yamamoto allowed himself one moment of cold fury at the betrayal humanity had suffered. Then, squaring his shoulders, he prepared to lead his species in a fight for their very existence. They think they know us, he whispered to the darkening sky. They have no idea what humanity is capable of when pushed too far. Admiral Kravnar stood on the command deck of the Dominance, flagship of what the Confederacy euphemistically called the Cultural Exchange Armada. His 4 arms operated separate control interfaces as he watched Earth grow larger on the main view screen. Status of the human defense grid, he inquired. Powered down as requested, Admiral, reported his executive officer. Their orbital platforms appear minimally staffed. Ground-based tracking systems are operating in passive mode only. Kravnar allowed himself a small gesture of satisfaction, a subtle rippling of his facial tentacles. The humans were behaving precisely as expected, having received the Confederate Council's request to power down defenses for the ceremonial fleet's arrival. "Deploy containment vessels to positions Alpha through Epsilon," he commanded. "Suppression teams on standby." As the ships moved into formation, a junior sensor officer frowned at her console. "Sir, I'm detecting anomalous temperature readings in Saturn's rings." "Specify." "Localized heat signatures, possibly mining operations. They weren't in our intelligence briefing." Kravnar dismissed the concern with a gesture. "Human industrial activity, irrelevant to our mission." Aboard the UES Defiance, hidden within a hollowed-out section of Saturn's rings, Captain Maya Phillips watched the Confederate fleet's approach through specialized sensors that operated on principles unknown to their enemies. "They've taken the bait," she reported to Admiral Yamamoto via quantum entanglement communicator, technology the Confederacy believed impossible for humans to develop. "Moving into primary strike positions exactly as predicted." "Execute on my mark," came Yamamoto's calm reply. "Remember, priority targets are their communication vessels and command ships. Disable rather than destroy when possible. We'll need prisoners." Phillips nodded to her weapons officer. Around her, the bridge crew, selected from Earth's most elite special forces, performed final checks on systems that had never been tested in actual combat. "All hands," she announced, "prepare for Phase 1. In near-Earth orbit, Admiral Kravnar was reviewing the final containment protocols when alarms suddenly blared across his command deck. "Multiple energy signatures," shouted his sensor officer, "emerging from Saturn's rings and Jupiter's upper atmosphere." "Impossible," Kravnar guessed. Their ship's coolant. The view screen filled with approaching vessels of unfamiliar design, sleek, angular craft that moved with impossible speed and precision. "Sir, they're using gravitational manipulation technology," the science officer reported, voice rising in alarm. "Advanced models we've never seen." "Countermeasures," Kravnar ordered. "Activate defense grid." But the Confederate fleet's defensive systems were responding sluggishly, their automated routines confused by targets using drive signatures their recognition software couldn't classify. On Earth's moon, in a facility buried beneath the Tycho crater, Commander Wei stood beside Dr. Imani Okafor as she initiated humanity's masterstroke. "Confederate systems rely on standardized protocols," she explained, fingers flying across a specialized interface. "Every piece of technology is shared with us contained backdoors, but those doors swing both ways." She pressed a final command, and throughout the Confederate fleet, control systems flickered as hidden code awakened. Emergency bulkheads sealed randomly. Targeting systems calibrated to incorrect coordinates. Communication arrays broadcast static. "How long will it hold them?" Wei asked. "Minutes only," Okafor replied. "They'll isolate and purge, but minutes are all we need." In those crucial minutes, Earth's true defense unfolded. From concealed hangars across the lunar surface, smaller craft launched. Drop ships carrying Special Forces troops in advanced combat exoskeletons. Unlike the Confederacy, which had abandoned personal combat in favor of automated weapons centuries ago, humanity had maintained and refined the art of close-quarters battle. The first Confederate vessel to be boarded was a support ship on the fleet's periphery. Its crew, confronted by armored humans breaching their hull, reacted with shock and confusion. Many had never faced an enemy in person. Admiral Kravnar watched in growing horror as his carefully orchestrated invasion disintegrated into chaos. Ship after ship reported boarders, their crews ill-equipped to repel them. The human vessels, meanwhile, demonstrated combat maneuvers that defied Confederate tactical databases. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Their technology is inferior. We've monitored every development." His tactical officer, face ashen, looked up from her console. "Sir, They knew. They'd been deceiving us, developing in secret while feeding us falsified data. For the first time in his distinguished career, Kravnar felt something alien to his species' psychology: doubt. The humans weren't fighting like a species surprised by betrayal. They were executing a coordinated, pre-planned response. "Send emergency signal to High Command," he ordered. The humans were prepared. Containment protocol has failed. Elena Salas moved silently through the maintenance tunnels of Concordat Station, the massive space habitat serving as the Confederacy's primary diplomatic hub. Beside her, Mira adjusted the holographic disguise that made them appear as vestry maintenance workers. Behind them followed Sorix and Trill, each carrying components for the quantum transmitter that represented their greatest hope. "Security checkpoint ahead," warned Sorix, his crystalline form dimmed to prevent reflections in the low light. "Remember, keep your movements methodical. Vestry never rush." They passed the automated scanners with measured steps, the stolen access codes granting them entry to the station's central communication nexus. Once inside, Mira immediately began assembling the transmitter while Elena stood guard. "How much longer?" Elena asked, checking the chronometer. The station's shift change would occur in 17 minutes, bringing with it increased security patrols. "Almost there," Mira replied, connecting crystalline components provided by Sorix's people. This technology was forbidden for a reason. The Confederacy can block standard transmissions, but quantum entanglement can't be blocked or traced, finished Trill, his clipped wings quivering with nervous energy. The perfect vector for truth. On the other side of the nexus, the Quilari exile Vex Morio worked at a separate terminal, his ancient access codes still functional after centuries of disuse. "I've accessed the override protocols. When your transmission begins, it will replace all Confederate broadcasts across 17 sectors." Mira activated the device. A holographic interface sprang to life, displaying the collected evidence of Confederate manipulation and the footage of Earth's ongoing resistance. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds and stations, regular Confederate broadcasts suddenly cut out. In their place appeared Admiral Elena Salas, her uniform torn and dirty, but her bearing unmistakably proud. "People of the Confederacy," she began, "my name is Admiral Elena Salas of Earth. What you are about to see may shock you, but I ask only that you watch and judge for yourselves." The transmission showed the compiled evidence, footage of the Novan subjugation, classified documents detailing the systematic suppression of technological development, and finally, the current battle for Earth, where Confederate forces were being soundly defeated by human ingenuity. On Vestry Prime, in the household of Counselor Zrenvex, a young Krell servant named Lirith watched the broadcast with widening eyes. When it ended, she looked at her clipped wings reflected in a polished surface, then at the sleeping form of her master. With trembling hands, she accessed his security terminal and disabled the household defenses. Across the mining world of Baraxis IV, Novan laborers paused in their work as the transmission played on every screen. Overseers shouted for the broadcasts to be terminated, but the damage was done. As one, the crystalline beings set down their tools and turned toward the Confederate administrative complex. In the Praxis Academy on the Aldari homeworld, Professor Kavorin watched in stunned silence alongside his students. When junior faculty moved to shut down the transmission, Kavorin stopped them. "Let them see," he said quietly. "It's time." Back on Concordat Station, Elena and her team worked quickly to disconnect the transmitter as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "We need to move," Sorix urged. "Security forces will converge here first." Elena nodded, but Vex Morio remained at his terminal. "You go. I have one final task." "What are you doing?" Mira asked. The ancient Quilari's eyes glittered with determination. "Fulfilling an oath made long ago. The Triumvirate maintains control through information superiority. I'm releasing everything: research databases, military protocols, technological specifications, to all worlds simultaneously. "They'll kill you for that," Alina said. "I'd lived too long already," Vex Morio replied. "But perhaps now I can die with honor." As they reluctantly left him to his task, Alina's communicator pulsed with an encrypted signal from Admiral Yamamoto. "Transmission received across all primary targets," came his voice. "Apprising reports coming in from 17 Confederate worlds. Prometheus fire deployment authorized." Alina exchanged looks with her companions. The prototype drive system, humanity's most closely guarded technological achievement, was being unveiled at last. "Rendezvous at Extraction Point Delta," she ordered. "We have one more role to play in this revolution." As they hurried through the darkened corridors, Trill suddenly grasped Alina's arm. "Listen." Through the station's walls came a sound none of them had expected. Singing. The Krell service workers, inspired by the broadcast, had begun their ancient freedom chorus, a melody not heard openly in Confederate space for 8 centuries. "It's happening," Trill whispered, tears in his eyes. "After all this time, it's really happening." The joint fleet materialized in Aldari space with no warning, bypassing the legendary defensive grid that had protected the Confederate capital for millennia. Admiral Yamamoto stood on the bridge of the UES Dauntless, watching as targeting systems identified key military installations on the planet below. "Status report," he ordered calmly. "Prometheus fire drive functioning at optimal parameters," reported his navigation officer. "Confederate fleet is scrambling, but they're in disarray. Our emergence point was completely unexpected." On the tactical display, Commander Wee directed the precision strikes against planetary defense systems. Unlike conventional Confederate warfare doctrine, which relied on overwhelming force, the human-led attack targeted command and control nodes with surgical precision. "Assault teams ready for deployment," Wei confirmed. "Team Avalanche will secure the landing zone. Team Titan will escort the infiltration group to the Concordat." Yamamoto nodded. "Remind all personnel, this is not about vengeance. We disable rather than destroy whenever possible." The first wave of dropships entered Aldari's atmosphere, their stealth systems rendering them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Within them, mixed teams of human special forces and fighters from liberated species prepared for the most important battle in galactic history. On the surface, chaos reigned. The capital city's security forces, accustomed to dealing with isolated incidents, found themselves overwhelmed by coordinated attacks from both orbital forces and internal resistance cells that had activated following Alina's broadcast. Inside the Spire of Dominion, the ancient fortress-like structure housing the Concordat chamber, Supreme Archon Vexillus received increasingly desperate reports. How did they bypass the stellar defense grid? He demanded of his military commander. "Unknown, Archon. Their drive signature simply appeared within our inner security perimeter. We've never seen anything like it." Vexillus's facial tentacles writhed with rage. "And our forces in the Sol system. No communication since their last report of human resistance. We must assume they've been neutralized." A junior Abe burst into the chamber. "Archon, ground forces have breached the outer perimeter. They're fighting their way up the ceremonial stairway." "Impossible." Vexillus moved to the security monitor. What he saw chilled his blood. Human soldiers in advanced combat armor moving with disciplined precision, covering each other's advances and tactics unseen in Confederate space for centuries. Alongside them fought Novans, their crystalline bodies deflecting energy weapons, and even Krell with specially designed armor accommodating their wings. "Seal the Concordat chamber," Vexillus ordered. "Activate Protocol Terminus." Archon protested his second. "Protocol Terminus will destroy historical artifacts dating back to." "Activate it now," Vexillus roared. "Everything we've built over millennia is at stake." As his subordinates rushed to comply, Vexillus accessed a hidden terminal beneath the ancient meeting table. His personal guards sealed the massive doors leading to the chamber, their weapons trained on the entrance. Outside, Alina Salas and her strike team pushed through the ornate corridors of the spire, guided by Vexmorio's detailed maps. Behind them, Orcs and a team of Novan fighters secured their exit route. "The chamber is just ahead," Alina told her team through the tactical network. "Expect heavy resistance and possible traps." Wei's voice came through her communicator. "Admiral, we're detecting unusual energy buildup within the central chamber. Possible self-destruct sequence." "Copy that." Alina signaled her specialists forward. "Dr. Patel, you're up." Mira stepped forward with a device developed from the combined technologies of 3 species. "If they're using standard Confederate protocols, I can disrupt them. If not..." Alina nodded grimly. "Do what you can." As Mira worked at the sealed doorway, Alina took a moment to absorb their surroundings. The corridor walls displayed the history of the Confederacy, or rather, the sanitized version they wanted remembered. Friezes depicted the founding species bringing enlightenment to primitive worlds, conveniently omitting the subjugation that followed. "Got it," Mira announced. "Countermeasures deployed. But we have 90 seconds at most before their systems adapt." Alina gave the signal. The assault team positioned themselves as the massive doors slowly parted. Within, Supreme Archon Vexillus and the Concordat Council awaited, surrounded by elite guards. "You've lost, Archon," Alina stated, stepping forward. "Your fleet is defeated. Your subject worlds are in revolt. Surrender, and we can end this without further bloodshed." Vexillus regarded her with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "You understand nothing, human. What we built was necessary. The alternative was chaos. The very chaos you've now unleashed." His hand moved toward a crystal embedded in the table before him. "And I would rather see it all end than fall to barbarians." 6 months after the Battle of Aldari Prime, Alina Salas stood at the podium in the newly constructed Covenant Hall. Sunlight streamed through the transparent dome, deliberately designed to contrast with the secretive chambers of the old Concordat. Representatives from 28 species filled the circular chamber, their differences in biology and culture on full display rather than hidden behind conformity protocols. "The document before us today," Alina announced, her voice carrying to all corners of the hall, "is not perfect. No document created by imperfect beings could be, but it represents something unprecedented. A true partnership founded on mutual respect rather than dominance." She glanced at Admiral Yamamoto, now walking with a cane after injuries sustained during the final battle. Beside him sat Dr. Okafor, whose technological breakthroughs had made victory possible. Commander Wei stood at attention near the human delegation, his uniform bearing the new insignia of the Stellar Covenant Defense Force. "We face challenges that would have seemed insurmountable 6 months ago," Alina continued. "Former Confederate loyalists continue guerrilla operations in 7 sectors. Worlds that relied on the old economic structure face hardship. Ancient hatreds between species, long suppressed but never healed, threaten our fragile alliance." Sorex, representing the Novan collective, rose from his crystalline seat. "And yet we face these challenges together, not as masters and servants, but as equals. My people remember what that word truly means, after centuries of being told we were lesser beings." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. In the gallery, Trill watched with unclipped wings, now leading the Krell Restoration Committee. The ceremonial wing clipping that had marked servant status among his people had been officially abolished, with the first generation of fully winged Krell hatching in special nurseries across their homeworld. "Before we sign," announced Kavorin, now leading the reformed Aldari government after the old regime's collapse, "we must acknowledge the difficult truth. Many of our species were complicit in the Confederacy's crimes, some more than others." His gaze swept the chamber, lingering on the vestry and his own Aldari delegation. "We cannot undo the past, but we can ensure it never repeats." Dr. Patel stepped forward, activating a holographic display in the center of the chamber. "To that end, we've created the Transparency Archive. All classified Confederate records, The true histories of subjugated worlds, the suppressed technologies, everything, will be available to every citizen of the Covenant. A Quillari representative, one of the few who had joined the resistance, added, and educational exchange programs will ensure that our young understand both the darkest chapters of our shared history and the promise of our future. As the various delegates rose to sign the document, a commotion at the entrance drew attention. A small group of humans entered, escorting an elderly Aldari in restraints. Vexillus, the former Supreme Archon, captured during his attempted escape after the battle. The chamber fell silent as he was brought forward. Alina stepped down from the podium to face him. "You once told me chaos would follow the Confederacy's fall," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Instead, we found partnership, not perfect, not without conflict, but genuine." Vexillus regarded her with ancient eyes. "You've won a battle, Admiral Salas. But the war, the true war, is against entropy itself. Order requires control." "No," Alina replied. "True order comes from cooperation, from diverse perspectives working toward common goals." She turned to the assembly. "The former Archon will stand trial for his crimes. But in accordance with our new principles, that trial will be transparent, fair, and focused on justice, not vengeance." As Vexillus was led away, Admiral Yamamoto joined Alina at the podium. "The signing is complete," he said. "The Stellar Covenant is now official." Across the chamber, representatives embraced, some weeping openly. Species that had been enemies for millennia clasped hands, tentacles or claws in gestures of reconciliation. Outside the hall, on a plaza overlooking the capital city, the Memorial of Liberation was unveiled, a sculpture created from the melted-down weapons of both sides of the conflict. Its inscription, written in the languages of all 28 founding species, read, "From deception, truth. From division, unity. From subjugation, freedom." As daylight faded, Dr. Okafor activated the memorial's internal lighting. The metal, infused with elements from each member world, cast a constellation of colored light across the gathering crowd, a symbolic new star map for a galaxy finding its way out of darkness.